You will be making your closing arguments in 2 minutes.
Closing argument.
Yes, please. And at the same time, the audience will be voting to see where they stand on the motion.
It was a long period, and we cannot redraw history. I believe that this is uneasy, as I told you, to go to the civil society, not to go to war immediately, to try to get the confidence of the people, to develop economy, etc. It takes decades and decades. But we have to do that. We have to give an example, because just to, let's say, to avoid military people and after some months or even before appear to the people like an occupation force is not the good way. I didn't say that we didn't have to react against 9/11. But the lesson learned from the Soviet war in Pakistan, not in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, but of course it was mixed. And the lesson everywhere is that the military solution is not possible. Yes, I'm in favor of international law, of course. Yes, I'm not in favor of rebuilding UN system, because it will be difficult. Even with that one, it's difficult to work. But the answer, the final argument is that we were looking for Muslim people, let's say, reacting against dictatorship. And we found them. We found them in the 3 countries you were quoted. And not only there, you will see. And this is the beginning of something. Yes, we have to, let's say, to authorize, I don't know, or to set up a Palestinian state. Yes, we have to do so. But it takes years and years. And this is very difficult, and this is my conclusion. You know, I've been a human rights fighter for 40 years. This is not exactly the same that being a foreign minister. Believe me. What is much more difficult is to be a foreign minister.
Okay, thank you. Audience, I should remind you, actually, as you're voting now on the motion, the war on terror was the right response to 9/11. If you're for the motion, tear that off, put that in the box. If you're against, put that on. And if you're still undecided and don't know, just put the whole ticket untorn into the boxes. All right, arguing for the motion, Colleen Graffy, please, your closing arguments incorporating some of those points, the objectives of the war on terror, where you stand on interrogation and rendition.
I take a point from you in looking at history. When Mussolini invaded Abyssinia, now Ethiopia, the League of Nations voted 54-0 that he had to get out, he had to be thwarted, it had to be stopped. They understood what needed to be done to ensure international security, but they didn't have the willpower to do it. The result was that the League of Nations collapsed, Mussolini stayed where he was, and Hitler was watching. In this war on terror, it's not enough to say that we can look the other way and that law enforcement is enough. It had been tried and it failed, and it sent the signal, just as the League of Nations did, that we weren't willing to do anything, that we weren't willing to stand up for our security. Now, military isn't just military. As I said, it gives you the full spectrum. You can't try and reduce poverty and illiteracy when you can't build schools and hospitals, and you can't do that unless you have the military. Now, I know there's bad news up and down, as President Musharraf has said. We shouldn't look at just the peaks and the troughs. We need to look at, was it the right decision overall? And as French Prime Minister Clemenceau said, he defined war as a series of catastrophes that end in victory. So the war on terror is no different. There's a lot of mistakes that have been made. There's a long road ahead, but the result is going to be, hopefully, a victory not only for the people in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also throughout the Middle East, that will give that oxygen to extinguish that flame that is radicalizing people and turning them towards terrorism.
Thank you. Against the motion, your closing arguments, Jeremy Greenstock.
I think we've heard from the proponents of this motion this evening just why the rhetoric of the war on terror has been such a diversion, such a distortion in this incredibly dramatic and changing 10 years that we're looking at. I'm afraid that Al-Qaeda and terrorism has not been the greatest threat to our societies over the last 10 years. The health of the global and the national economies have been much more important than that. The health of the developing world has been more important than that. The health of civil society has been more important than that. Was it the job of the military action to make our countries safer? Nobody's making the world safer. Yes, it was, and military action was necessary, but thinking that this was just a war missed the point that terrorism grows within our own societies. It comes from social diseases within our own communities. And the policing and the economic policies and the environmental policies that have to go along with the military action are the most important things that a government has to put together. Is the UN any use in doing this? Yes, it is, if governments can agree, because the UN sets the norms, the legitimacy, the arguments for a decent society, for a collective approach to global problems that no other institution in this world can do. We have to put these things together, and the focus on war, on American national interest, distorted that proper approach. That's what we're trying to say on this side of the argument.
General Musharraf, your closing arguments.
Yes, please. I have already said that we have to take a very holistic view of fighting terrorism. And I have said that it has three facets: the military, political, and socio-economic. But we also have to see this from the short-term, mid-term, and long-term perspective. I personally believe when we apply the military or the force, or we use physical force against terror, it is in the short-term perspective. But it is the key to success in the other domain of political and socio-economic. And I totally agree with Colleen that unless you create an environment to be able to use the political